to have you tonight, and we are down to chapter 25, verse 23. We're looking at the pattern for the table of showbread. And we are ready now to begin this section. This before you is one representation of what the table of showbread may have looked like. Another representation of the table with the staves that would be used to carry it. Now, since none of us, including Opal, was there, we don't know exactly what it looked like. Opal came along a year or two after, so we don't know exactly what it looked like, but we get a picture from what the scriptures say. Beginning in chapter 25, verse 23, through verse 29, and then you hold your finger and while you're studying to chapter 37, 10 through 16, and you read about the making of it. Here's how it's to be made, and then over there is how it was made. So you put those two together as you go along. In verse 33 of chapter 25, we learned that it was to be made of acacia wood. You're reading from the King James, shittim wood. And then you have in verse 23 the dimensions of it, using the 18-inch cubit. Would be approximately 36 inches long, 18 inches broad, and 27 inches high. Verse 24, it was overlaid with pure gold, with a molding round about it. And that would seem to be indicated by this right here, that molding that would go round about it. A border of a handbreadth round about it was to be made with a golden crown to the border. A handbreadth is approximately 3 inches. That's verse 25. Verses 26 and 27, a ring of gold for each corner on each foot was to be made. The rings were to be close to the border for places for the staves to bear the table. So you had staves in the ark, you have staves in the table of showbread. Staves were to be made of acacia wood overlaid with gold. And the table, verse 28, was to be borne by the staves, carried with them. And then in verse 29, you have dishes, spoons, flagons, and bowls, apparently a golden bowl, placed on the table of showbread, used for the drink offering. And these were to be made of pure gold. Now, if you turn to Numbers, chapter 4, look at verse 7. On the table of showbread they shall spread a blue cloth, and put on it the dishes, the pans, the bowls, and the pitchers for pouring, and the showbread shall be on it. So, while we have not dealt with the drink offering, here you have that which is made for it. And it will be used in connection with the offerings that are to be given. Then in verse 30 you have the showbread on the table. You shall set the showbread on the table before me always. Now go to chapter 39. Verse 36. Verse 32 says, the work of the tabernacle of the tent of meeting was finished. children of Israel did according to all that Jehovah had commanded Moses, so they did. Verse 36, the showbread. Then turn over to chapter 40, 22 and 23. He put the table in the tabernacle of meeting on the north side of the tabernacle, outside the veil. And he set the bread in order upon it before Jehovah, as Jehovah had commanded Moses. Now, when you study through this Old Testament, and you have Jehovah giving a command to do something, if the Bible records the fulfillment of that command, you're going to have something like, as Jehovah commanded whomever. And it would be good if you made note of that as you studied, because that means it was done right. It was done according to whatever God said. And in your notes, you would want to write along those passages something like obedience. You have obedience, and you'll see that stressed throughout the Old Testament. So it is not then by surprise when we get to the New Testament, there's an emphasis on obedience. In Romans, obedience to the faith, chapter 1, chapter 16. So we come to have that showbread. Now, number one under B, the very name showbread literally means bread of the faces, or presence bread. Man is represented as face to face with God in fellowship through atonement for sin. Notice that you have bread connected with fellowship. And one of the things you see through the Bible that cues you into the fact that we're dealing with fellowship is eating. And with most of the offerings, they had a feast when they offered those offerings, or they had a special day, they had a feast. And the idea of fellowshipping in the breaking of bread, or in the eating of the meal. So when you get to 1 Corinthians 5, and you read about disfellowshipping the man at Corinth living with his stepmother, or you deal with 2 Thessalonians 3 and marking those that are causing the divisions, you get the idea, don't even eat with them. Know not to eat with them. Now what that means is, you're not in fellowship with them when they're in disobedience to God willfully. And the eating of a meal signified fellowship with them. So that's what's involved there. And we all know that we could eat a meal with an unfaithful Christian if our intent was to try to win them back. But we could not go with them or involve them in the eating of a meal that implied everything's okay. We condone how you're living. And thus, we're all right. We get along, we do as we always do. You can't do that. Now, families have peculiar responsibilities. Bring this up because somebody will ask it anyway. What about a family? Families have peculiar responsibilities. But even in a family where you do eat together commonly, the family must let this unfaithful Christian know, we're having a meal together because we're a family, but we don't condone your lifestyle. We don't support the way you live. We're not going to help you in that. You need to be restored. And I cannot imagine hearing that if you, well, I could in our day, but when I grew up, we ate 3 meals a day. And here you think about a family saying that to a wayward family member 3 times a day, every day. That individual's either going to leave or be restored, probably. But you cannot just ignore it and say everything's okay. All right, so you have the showbread. Notice that the showbread was to be set on the table before Jehovah always, verse 30. It's set before Jehovah. Now, what would that reference to? that prepositional phrase. Well, yes. Every time the tabernacle is set up, it's there. Anything else? I know you know right off what this is. But just thinking you might, does that help? Not really.
Its location regarding the Ark of the Covenant.
All right.
And the location of the tabernacle.
There's your veil, Ark of the Covenant, the table of showbread, before Jehovah. Before Jehovah. So you have Jehovah's dwelling in the most holy place. That's the idea behind it, before Jehovah. Now if you go to Leviticus chapter 24, you have the details concerning the showbread. Leviticus 24. Now, what I'm trying to stress in your Bible study is, in order to learn what the Bible teaches about something, what must one do? All right, so you're dealing with showbread, you want to go to Leviticus 24. Beginning in verse 5, and the New King James here has the head note, bread of the tabernacle. Does your Bible have a head note there? All of you in New King James would have the same one. Does anyone else?
It says the showbread.
Okay, the showbread. The showbread. And when you study, if you have that across the top, and you figure out what verses are involved in that, it wouldn't hurt to go up where that title is given and put the verses. Which if you are quickly looking for something, will help you find it.
In the King James, it actually puts the verse, it's right under the chapter 24,
Uh-huh.
not at the very top of the Bible or the page, but right under the words chapter 24, it's got a 5 and then the showbread.
Okay?
So,
All right, it does in your edition.
yeah, yes.
Yes. The thing we have to learn is unless we're all using the same edition of a Bible, it may be laid out differently. It may have different titles that are there. But verse 5, you shall take fine flour and bake 12 cakes with it. 2 tenths of an ephah shall be in each cake. All right, how many cakes? 11 meal cake.
No,
13 meal cake.
no,
Why 12?
specific.
That's right, that's it. Now, we probably think it would at least point to 12 tribes. Huh?
That's what I was thinking.
Okay, I'll let you think that. Now, let's wrestle with this a little bit. How many tribes are there? Why wouldn't you have 13 pieces of showbread? The priests are ministry, aren't they? So there's a differentiation in the land grant. Jehovah's the portion of Levi instead of land. So if this does have a connection with 12 tribes, that's why you have 12 pieces. That makes sense? Good, y'all are putting some things together. That thrilled me. You shall set them in 2 rows, 6 in a row, on the pure gold table, notice again, before Jehovah. How many rows? 2. 3 be okay? Why? What? Not authorized. All right, how many cakes or wafers are to be in each set, each row? 6. That's just orderly. Is that 3? No, you got 6. 6. 6 and 6 are 12 in base 10. So that's the way there'd be. You notice here detail? Where in our Bible are we first introduced to the concept of attention to detail? Creation. Day 1, prepared for day 4. Day 2, prepared for day 5. Day 3, prepared for day 6. Nothing was done out of order. When day 4 got there, we were ready for it. Everything God does is order. You see the orderliness here set before these. Verse 7, you shall put pure frankincense on each row. That, in order that it may be on the bread for a memorial, an offering made by fire to Jehovah. All right, frankincense on each row. Therefore, frankincense would be on how many rows? How many? 2. Why? Huh?
That's what God said.
Well, that's true. There's
He
another
authorized.
reason.
That's our 2
Yeah,
rows.
you don't have the 2 rows. Okay? So you'd have 2 rows of bread, you'd have pure frankincense on them.
James, go back to verse 5. What
Okay.
does it mean when it says 2/10 deals shall be in one cake?
If you have a table of measures in your Bible, the King James says what? 2/10 what?
2/10
Deal.
shall be
D-I-L-L.
in one cake.
D-E-A-L. All right. That is, that's a measure. If your Bible gives a table of measures, you would look up what a deal is according to whoever put that together in that table, and you get a good guess,
But why is it just in one cake?
because that's what he says. 2/10 of an ephah shall be in each cake. So you put 2/10 in this cake,
Oh,
and
okay.
2/10 in that
You're
cake.
saying the one cake means all the cakes.
No, it means each cake.
That's what I mean.
You got 12 of them.
Okay, right.
You have 2/10 of an ephah of fine flour in each one.
Way it sounds like it was just put in one cake, the
No,
way this verse is.
no, put in each cake. Does King James not say at the end of verse 5
Says
each
in
cake?
one cake,
Okay, in one cake, all right.
yeah. And that's what threw me.
There was evening, there was morning, one day.
Okay.
See, and then there was evening, there was morning, the second day is the idea. So you have 12 cakes. Good question. Thank you. Now, one writer said, the use of incense suggests that the bread was actually a meal offering to Jehovah. Turn to Leviticus. Just hold your finger here and turn back to Leviticus 2. I'm not going to take the time to cover this, except to give you some information. Leviticus 2, 1 through 11, deals with what is called the King James, the American Standard, meal offering. Or you may have meat offering, I think some translations. The New King James, the grain offering. That's more of an accurate picture of what's under consideration, a grain offering. And this bread is to be offered made out of grain, made out of flour, to be a meal offering, a grain offering to Jehovah. Now, the grain offering is in Leviticus chapter 2. Everybody with me? And in addition to Leviticus 2, chapter 6, verses 14 to 23. Have I given you all this before? I gave it to you. Where did I give it to you? In this class when we were down here?
That's my assumption.
Okay. Well, you know what that is. So the grain offering is Leviticus 2 and chapter 6, verses 14 to 23. So when you read about the meal offering, you read all that. If we ever get Leviticus, that's the way we'll cover it. So, incense being used, sending up the memorial, frankincense, sending up the memorial to Jehovah. The term fire offering, Leviticus 24, verse 7. You shall put pure frankincense on each roll, that it may be on the bread for a memorial, an offering made by fire. Do you all have that? Fire offering is applied to several types of offering. The burnt offering in Exodus 29, Leviticus 1, the meal offering, Leviticus 2, peace offering, Leviticus 3, sin offering, Leviticus 5. And this writer says, from this fact, we may be reminded that in Christ's one offering are summed up all the numerous types of offerings prescribed in the Old Testament law. It would appear that the showbread was basically one form of the meal offering. When you get to Leviticus and you start reading the first 7 chapters of Leviticus, you will deal with the offerings under the law. And Jesus, the book of Hebrews tells us, offered what? Himself one time for all. So what Jesus did summed up all the offerings of the Old Testament. But you have an offering made by fire, so that memorial goes up. The term memorial is a sacrificial term referring to that which brings the worshiper in favorable remembrance. What's in the word memorial? Memory. Favorable remembrance before God. Now, let's look at it in Acts 10. Acts 10 deals with Cornelius. Verse 4, when he observed him, he was afraid and said, "What is it, Lord?" So he said to him, "Your prayers and your alms have come up for," do you have here, a memorial before God, a remembrance. Favorable remembrance before God. And that's the idea in Leviticus 2:2, Leviticus 5:12, and Leviticus 6:15. The showbread is said to have become a memorial when the frankincense was applied to it. Leviticus 24:7. You shall put pure frankincense on each roll, that it may be on the bread for a memorial, an offering made by fire unto Jehovah. frankincense is well known to us based on what? Well, it's well known to most religious people. But,
The birth of Jesus.
okay, what about it?
That's when the men were supposed to bring the frankincense.
What men?
You know them things,
Yeah.
A magi.
Scholarly pronouncements. The wise men from the east brought how many gifts?
Three books.
I hear 5, I hear 4, I hear 3, and going 1, going 5. What are we going for here? How many gifts? 3. That's how we know there are 3 wise men, right?
Well, they say that. Yeah, I guess. Well, they don't.
No, it isn't.
No, they don't say that.
That's right.
That's right.
See how easy it is to lead somebody off?
I know it.
Especially if they trust you. You see what I'm trying to tell you? You listen to what's being said, not how it's being said. But we don't know how many wise men there were, but the false conclusion that there were 3 comes from the fact there were 3 gifts. And those 3 gifts were gold and frankincense and myrrh. All right, so here we see frankincense being used. And then there it's brought there. All right, so any questions now on this setting up of the bread before we move to frequency?
Yeah.
Verse 8. What is the first word in your translation on verse 8? Every. Is that King James too? Every. How many does that eliminate? Huh? None. Every what? Huh? Every what? Every Sabbath. What day of the week is that? Saturday on our calendar. What number day of the week is it? 7th day. Right? Every Sabbath, every 7th day, he shall set it in order. Look at that word order. Everything orderly. Before Jehovah continually. From the children of Israel by an everlasting covenant. So, every Sabbath, the bread is set up on behalf of the children of Israel as an everlasting covenant. Now, when's the last time we partook of showbread? On Saturday. Why are we not doing that? It says continually. It says everlasting. Sir? Bless your heart. Which necessitated, and that's found, all right, you change priesthoods. Therefore, you change covenants. So everlasting here has a terminus. Olam here has a terminus, has an end. When that law ended, then this ended. And when did that law end? Where? Pentecost. Great. Great. Y'all are putting it together. All right, so we see every Sabbath from now until Pentecost of Acts 2, this is supposed to be done. All right, now notice, When you remove bread, you have old bread, putting new bread in place every Sabbath. What are you going to do with the old bread? Look at verse 9. And it shall be for Aaron and his sons, and they shall eat it in a holy place, for it is most holy to him from the offerings of Jehovah made by fire by a perpetual statute. What is a perpetual statute?
Never ending.
Okay, so why aren't we doing it today?
Priesthood change.
Ah! Never ending then is governed by the priesthood under which it is established. You change priesthood, you change that which is connected to that priesthood. So, and again, as you study, you learn to try to fine-tune your terminology. So you say, never ending as long as the covenant which regulates it is in force. Because you change the priesthood, you change the covenant, therefore that's not in force anymore. Now, why I'm telling you all this is this. You study with somebody who's not a Christian, and one of the first questions they're going to ask you about the church is what? Do what?
Why you take the Lord's Supper on Sunday?
Why do you take Lord's Supper every Sunday? What's our answer?
Because the Bible says to.
It was commanded to do so.
Jesus.
Jesus
Bible
said, do
tells me so.
this in remembrance of me. It's a memorial.
You slipped in.
I think you'll look long and hard to no avail.
Acts 20.
That's a good start.
I'll give it
They don't even look alike. Where in Acts 20?
7.
Yeah. Acts 20 and 7, upon the first day of the week, you have an approved apostolic example. Where else? Would you go for a like observance of something on the same day? That's a weird way to say it. 1 Corinthians 16 shows they met on the first day of every week. That's connected with the eating. Acts 2 and 42, those first Christians continued steadfastly in the apostles' teaching, the fellowship, the breaking of the bread. That's a reference to the Lord's Supper. All right? That's one question. I do not find that to be the most popular question we get asked.
Why do we not use music?
Why ain't y'all got no piano in that church? And you say it's not authorized, and what's generally one of the first things you hear? They used it in the Old Testament. And that's true.
Now, Brother James, that's not what they tell me. They think the Old Testament is the New Testament. Because they heard it in the Psalms.
Say that again now.
They think the Psalms is part of the New Testament.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's what Bible study is all about.
That's right.
And the reason we don't use it, even though they used it in the Old Testament, is priesthood's been changed. So we're no longer under that covenant. You see, if you know that, you can help people understand, and it'll take some time, like people who believe that, Monty. It takes time to show people how the Bible's divided. But it helps them eventually, maybe, if they're honest, they will, understand why being in the Old Testament doesn't authorize it for the New Testament. That makes sense to you? So you get Hebrews 7:12 and how it applies, the Old Testament, New Testament, That's a great tool when you're studying the Bible. Yes, sir.
I think it's Dan Chambers who writes a book, Where is the Piano? It's a very good read if anybody want to read it.
Okay. Now, this bread is referred to as continual bread. Look at Numbers chapter 4. Looking for continual bread. I think I put the wrong reference. Do what? Numbers 4:7.
Yeah, 4:7 is it.
Yeah, that's it.
Oh, yeah, okay, it's a marginal reading. On the table of showbread, they shall spread a blue cloth and put on it the dishes, the pans, the bowls, and the pitchers for pouring, and the showbread, and the New King James, I hope King James, I'm not sure, has a marginal reading for the literally continual bread.
Yes, and the continual bread.
Showbread, continual bread. So if you look up the literal meaning of the word, it would be continual bread. And it continues as long as the covenant is in force. That makes sense? Thank you. All right, go to 1 Samuel 21. Verse 4, and the priest answered David, this is when David is hungry and he comes to the priest, there is no common bread, ordinary bread, on hand, but there is holy bread, consecrated, set apart bread. If the young men have at least kept themselves from women. And then down in verse 6, so the priest gave him holy bread, for there was no bread there, but the show bread. So this holy bread is the show bread, which had been taken from before Jehovah in order to put hot bread in its place on the day when it was taken away. Now this is referenced in the New Testament to show not that the priest and David did violate the law, because that bread was to be only for the priest, but to show that the Pharisees were hypocritical in that they didn't blame David for what he did, but they were blaming Christ, accusing him of violating the law when all he had violated was their tradition. So the New Testament use of this does not say what David did was okay. It's used to illustrate the hypocrisy of the Pharisees. Now, knowing that that bread was to be eaten only by the priest in a holy place helps you understand that. So you put it all together. Questions, comments there? All right, in Exodus 37, just a reminder, verses 10 through 16. Verse 10, he made the table. Verse 11, he overlaid it. Verse 12, also he made. Verse 13, he cast. Verse 15, he made. Verse 16, he made. So all the way through, he made it according to the pattern. We're stressing that over and over and over and over. According to the pattern showed you on the mountain. So there is a pattern. Questions or comments on the showbread? Anyone? We think of the showbread in one sense, reminding us of what? The fact there's bread,
The Lord's Supper.
the Lord's Supper. Reminds us of that. We use bread. We use a certain kind of bread. And it's authorized bread. So there's such a thing as unauthorized bread in observing the Lord's Supper. I'm sorry.
When we do the act of that time there, would it be considered as holy bread? Or after service, if you took it and
If it did, I've got a lot of repenting to do because as a boy, I love that stuff. My mama made it
right, but you didn't do it during the,
Oh, no.
during the service?
only because they wouldn't let me get hold of it properly. But I was the cleanup machine. And so was every other boy whose mama made it.
Yeah.
What is she making?
Unleavened bread.
Oh,
See, back
that's
in,
the same thing as yeast bread?
No.
no, it has no leaven in it. It can't rise.
And leaven is yeast, leaven is like.
The idea that makes it rise,
Okay.
yeah. See, when I was growing up, we didn't order communion bread.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
The women made it. And it's just like, they were on the work list. This lady will make it this week, this lady will make it that week. And I love that stuff.
Well, I'm just thinking as far as the time that we take it.
When we are partaking of it, the bread itself does not become holy. What it represents is holy, which is the body of Christ. See, the Catholics teach the bread actually becomes the body of Christ. So when you eat the wafer, to them, you're eating the literal body. When you drink the fruit of the vine, you're drinking the literal blood. That's called transubstantiation. It's a big old jawbreaker word for it, ain't so. But that's what they believe and teach. So the bread itself doesn't take on a holiness, but the representation is what's holy. So generally when the men are presiding, they will say something like, this represents the body. Jesus implied it, but he made a more direct statement when he said, this is my body. He didn't mean that literally. Because none of the disciples ate on him that day. They ate the unleavened bread that was being used in Passover, Matthew 26. So if a child gets loose and eats a piece of unleavened bread while we're worshiping, he has not committed sacrilege. He's not eating holy bread. Now, he shouldn't get loose. But if that were to happen, I can't imagine any parents who would let their children get loose. Yeah. Well, he's probably been to Bible class where they teach him to eat instead of study, and so he wants another snack. That's probably, it's an extension. You know, I'm here, hey, I got a snack in Bible class, give me a snack here. One fellow said, as a boy growing up, they loved worship. Because he said those people would pass a basket of money down your road. So I guess greedy people would see the money, and hungry people would see the bread and drink the grape juice. But to answer your question, I'm being a little bit facetious. To answer your question, no, it doesn't become, the bread itself doesn't become holy bread. But this was because it was in a holy place, which is the tabernacle in the holy place itself. So it's in a holy place. And the priests, see, were to eat it, not inside the holy place itself, but in their relationship to the tabernacle, in a holy place. They didn't go home and eat it as common bread. And you see that, and you get Leviticus, you put it all together. That was a good question. Anyone else? You're thinking. Now, this was specific, wasn't it? 2 rows, 6 loaves in each row. We don't have that specificity on setting up the communion. What's specified in setting up or observing the Lord's Supper? What's specified in connection with that?
Just the remembrance that it is his,
The purpose.
yeah, the purpose.
What else?
That it's unleavened bread and the
All right.
fruit of the vine.
Unleavened bread and fruit of the vine, so we're not at liberty to get a grape soda. Or in the South, we call it a grape Coke. We're not at liberty to do that and get soda crackers. I can't do that. What else is specified?
That we do it on the first day.
The day. So you have the purpose, the emblems, and the day are all specified. And we don't have a right to tamper with that. It's not okay to observe the Lord's Supper on Saturday night at a wedding.
Or every 3 months.
Yeah, I mean, the specificity of the observance is every first day of the week. So while we don't have, you have set it up this way, why do we not have, you don't have to set it up this way?
Priesthood.
Well, that's true. Hebrews 7:12. But I'm thinking more in a comparative vein. First of all, where must we place the emblems in order to observe the Lord's Supper?
Place them?
Yeah.
What?
Where must we put the unleavened bread and the fruit of the vine in order to observe the Lord's Supper?
Wherever it's convenient for the men to reside at the table. Huh? In the building.
Belly.
Oh,
We observe it that way.
I'll track it.
Okay, we do.
That's true, we are to eat it. My point is, we don't, in comparison, we don't have what?
We don't have a place.
We don't have a holy table.
Yeah.
We don't have a holy table. Now, how many of our members, and boys and girls, grow up thinking the table on which we set the unleavened bread and the fruit of the vine, and of course the contribution plates, is the Lord's table?
I used to.
Did y'all grow up thinking that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because when the men who are presiding would say something like, we're gathered around the Lord's table. And boys and girls see a literal table. What is the Lord's table? It's the unleavened bread and fruit of the vine, not the literal table on which it sits. You with me? They had a holy table. We don't have a holy table. They had a specified table. We don't have a specified table. So, is it okay? Okay, is it authorized to put the unleavened bread and the fruit of the vine on a table and let people walk around and get it and partake of it? Is that authorized? How many of you, if you went to a place that did it that way, would have second thoughts? Why?
People have second thoughts because some do it first in the, service, some do it last, and they say, all that
Good
stuff
front
is
loader.
to me.
We have second thoughts because we've never done it that way.
That's right.
Good from.
So there, I'm on my soapbox now. y'all didn't put this on the soapbox. There is a danger in not explaining things. And it doesn't hurt. I'm not advocating rebellion, okay? It doesn't hurt to change things up occasionally to help teach. To help teach. I am thankful that we separate the observance of the Lord's Supper and the contribution, because people, even our own people here, for years thought that the contribution was a part of the observance of the Lord's Supper. One of my best students that I've had here, young person, when I was teaching the young people, on one Sunday morning, I was listing items of worship. And I said, what are the items of worship? So they gave me Lord's Supper, singing, praying, preaching. And I waited. And nobody said anything. And I waited. And I said, what about giving? And one of my best students said, oh, I included that with the Lord's Supper. And I said, that's not your fault, that's ours. We haven't taught you right. You see, when little boys and girls observe, they don't know any better than to do it the way they saw it done. And it took a long time to get the Lord's Supper to get him divided. We never did it that way.
But they always, whoever is doing the Lord's Supper, they always say, and separate from the Lord.
They don't always, but a
Well,
great deal
most
they
of the
do.
time.
And they use a double negative or a double redundancy, separate and apart. The same thing,
Trying to get the point across.
I guess.
That's right, so everybody will know. it's-
I have another thought on that.
Say it twice, it's got meaning to it.
That's right.
He ain't up there doing it, that's why.
Yeah.
Separate and apart from the Lord's Supper. Well, it didn't work. All those years that was said.
There's been places where the places are even behind,
Yeah,
and they get through the Lord's Supper, then it gets in,
right.
bring them up.
Or put them underneath
So
the
we're
table.
going now, we're going.
Yeah.
I've seen them at the back of the door when you leave.
Well,
The Lord's Supper.
No, well, not
let
that.
me just get you to think about this. If you've already dismissed the assembly, are you giving in the assembly when you do it that way? That's the problem. I suggested it here, so I had to eat crow on that. That's the problem I had with the way we were doing it during COVID. We took it out of the assembly. And we shouldn't have done that. I didn't think that one through.
Hmm.
But when it hit me, I said, we need to change this. And we did.
There were some things that we changed during the COVID that we went back that maybe showed that, you know, we have changed things up.
Yeah, and you don't have to do it a certain way.
We were given when we came in.
Yeah, and when we were going out, but not in the assembly. So they had a way it had to be done. We have certain things that have to be done. But order is a matter of judgment. Like, do you have it at the first or the last or in the middle, or do you sing one song before it, or no songs before it, or 5 songs before it?
Me and you visited a couple that worship started when the announcement started.
Yeah.
And they didn't come back.
Yeah.
Tried to explain. it.
Announcements started worship, and what I asked was, where's the pastor? Announcements are not a part of our worship. I maintain the devil unleashed announcements on us, because I hate to do them. But, see, what do we think? Well, start with an announcement. And we do ours last, and I love it. We start worship. That's a matter of judgment. You can make announcements first and then start worship. See, we're not given a set order in which to do it. So you're with me on some parallels, but not in minute detail. They had minute detail. You change this bread every Saturday. And then when it's changed, priest eat it. You don't give it to your children. Don't give it to anybody. See, we don't have that. We're not told what can be done with the leftover unleavened bread. We're not told anything has to be done with it. And if it were holy, if the bread became holy, and we had it left over, and we threw it away, we'd be throwing away holy bread.
Was leavened bread tough?
Huh?
Was it tough, the bread?
Well, it would
Unleavened
rise.
bread, is it tough?
It would rise. I'm not a cook now, but it would rise. It had yeast in it. The unleavened bread wouldn't rise, and you could make it quickly. Remember in Exodus 12, they ate unleavened bread because they were leaving immediately. They didn't have time for the dough to rise.
But when they made it, when you were young,
It was just a flat,
bread.
yeah,
Plain flour.
Flour and water. It's
Just a-
flour and water, I think.
yeah, a flat bread.
That's all it is,
Yeah,
Very dry.
yeah,
flour and water.
it's delicious.
Don't have to be plain flour, because the other flour's got yeast
Yeah,
in it.
but
Oh, self-rising's got yeast in it?
oh, yeah.
Oh.
I wonder if that's what self-rising means.
Well, I'm a good cook, I know all about it.
I know, I do. All right, other questions or comments?
So I was wondering, as far as the priests, they had to eat in a certain area.
Yes.
How many priests are we talking about?
Well, at this time, 4.
4 priests eating 12 loaves of bread.
And their families.
But they were just
Their families.
discs of the bread.
They weren't-
It's like a loaf
they
of
weren't-
Loaves.
Oh, yeah, they're not loaves.
They weren't real pancake bread, see. I mean, it wasn't this thing.
Yeah.
You know, small loaves.
You could get some butter and eat it, those probably.
3 loaves apiece.
You know, before this gets out of hand, let's take a break. David is my proofreader, and he helps me correct my mistakes, and his pointing out something on your outline reminded me that I need to say this. For the most part, my outlines are based on the wording of the American Standard Translation. That's my study Bible. I use this one to teach and preach from because it's easier for people to read and easier for our younger people to grasp. So on, what's the thing with always?
Number 2.
Number 2, where it says it's to be before Jehovah always, that's the reading of the American Standard. The New King James says always. Same word, just a different way to use it. Now, on the numbering, it's on that same point, right? The numbering under that point goes from 3 to 5. You need to fix that if you didn't already on your outline, 3 to 4. And I'll tell you why those things occur. It's not always the gremlin. When I am working on outlines, there are times, cut and paste is wonderful. I will combine a point, or I'll reword a point. Where I had 2 main points, I'll reword it into one, and I don't think to change the number. So a lot of times, that's why you'll have the misnumbering. A lot of times it's the gremlin that gets in there with a lot, but that's one of the more logical reasons as to why those mistakes may crop up. I count on you to just correct them in your outline. I count on David to help me get mine fixed. And I appreciate that. I do not mind people helping me. Second, when we were talking about the Lord's Supper, David asked a good question I think I need to introduce. Does it matter in which order we take the bread and the fruit of the vine? That's a good question. In all of our lives, it's always been you eat the bread and then eat the fruit of the vine. But there's a reason for that. In Matthew and Luke and 1 Corinthians 11, that's the order that's given. But I particularly want to call your attention to Luke, because Luke, first of all, introduces it backwards, and then he goes and shows that this is how it was done. In Luke 21, 22, I believe. Yeah, Luke 22, in verse 17, after he had said, I will no longer eat it until it is fulfilled in the kingdom of God, verse 17, he took the cup and gave thanks and said, take this and divide it among yourselves, for I say to you, I will not drink of the fruit of the vine until the kingdom of God comes. And he took bread, gave thanks, and broke, and gave to them, saying, this is my body which is given for you, this do in remembrance of me. Likewise, he also took the cup after supper. So even in Luke, you have an order, saying, this cup is the new covenant in my blood, which is shed for you. When he took the cup the first time, he said, divide it among you. And I won't drink it with you until I drink it you in the kingdom. And then he instituted the Lord's Supper by observing the bread and the fruit of the vine. So I believe we have a scriptural example of the order in which we partake it. I know that's safe. To do it any other way would have to go out on somebody's opinion, and I'm not willing to put mine together.
So 19 and 20, you would say is the proper order?
Bread, fruit of the vine.
Right.
Because that's the way it is in Matthew. It's also the way Paul gave it in 1 Corinthians 11. And he said, this is what I received. So I believe that if we do it that way, I know we're doing it biblically. So that's a good question. I appreciate you raising that. All right, now let's move to look at the golden candlestick or the lampstand. Chapter 25, 31 through 40, chapter 37, 17 to 24, and then there are some other verses that are involved with this. Let's look at Numbers chapter 8. In Numbers 8, beginning in verse 2, speak to Aaron and say to him, when you arrange the lamps, the 7 lamps shall give light in front of the lampstand. And Aaron did so. He arranged the lamps to face toward the front of the lampstand, as Jehovah commanded Moses. See that? Now this workmanship of the lampstand was hammered gold, from its shaft to its flowers was hammered work, according to the pattern which Jehovah had shown Moses, so he made the lampstand. All right, so here's how it's made. It's to shine before the lampstand. All right, go to 1 Kings 7, and you have Solomon building the temple. Verse 49, the lampstands of pure gold, 5 on the right side and 5 on the left, in front of the inner sanctuary, with the flowers and the lamps and the wick trimmers of gold. So when Solomon built the temple, it was much bigger. And so he increased the lampstands, the number of them. But where they would be, as it said here, in the inner sanctuary. So that'd be in the Holy place. Then in Zechariah, that's one of those books some people rarely, if ever, get to. In Zechariah, chapter 4, let's start in verse 1. Now the angel who talked with me came back and wakened me as a man who is wakened out of his sleep. And he said to me, what do you see? So I said, I am looking, and there's a lampstand of solid gold with a bowl on top of it, and on the stand 7 lamps with 7 pipes to the 7 lamps. So Zechariah, in this vision, sees the lampstand. Now when you go to the New Testament, you go to Hebrews chapter 9. Now to properly understand Hebrews 9, you need to do what? Read the first 8 chapters. Because chapter 9 verse 1 begins how? Then. You don't begin a new thought with that. Then indeed, even the first covenant had ordinances of divine service and the earthly sanctuary, for a tabernacle was prepared, the first part in which was the lampstand. So we're in the holy place. You have reference here to it. Then in Revelation, chapter 1, and in this vision, verse 12, then I turned to see the voice that spoke with me, and having turned, I saw 7 golden lampstands. Are you seeing this vision? Right? 7 golden lampstands. To a Jew, that would have some meaning to it. We are remembering the lampstand that was in the holy place, even though when the Hebrews writer wrote and John wrote, that was all gone as far as God was concerned. But the picture was still there to be illustrative. Of course, the Hebrews writer is dealing with the actual tabernacle under the law of Moses to compare it to the better priesthood of Christ. So we're looking now at the making of this candlestick or this lampstand in Exodus 25, verses 31 through 40. And then chapter 37, 17 to 24, the actual building of it. In verse 31, it is to be made of pure gold. So impure gold wouldn't be accepted. Notice how many times in the building of this tabernacle and other things you have the word pure. Pure. Something that is not contaminated. Sacrifices had to be pure, unblemished sacrifices. Without spot, without blemish. Now, in observing the Lord's Supper, do we have anything that references purity?
The unleavened bread.
Unleavened bread hadn't been acted on by any outside influence. The unleavened bread points then to our lifestyles are to be pure when we observe it. It's representative of purity. The purity of the Christ, whose body it represents, and it is to remind us of our purity in worship. We are to be pure in our lifestyles. So this idea of purity, made of pure gold. In verse 31, the candlestick shall be made of beaten work, including its base, shaft, cups, knot was a wreath-like button or disc on the candelabrum, and its flowers. They shall be of one piece with it. Now that means absolutely nothing to me because I don't know anything about fabricating and beating things out and that kind of thing. But somebody who does that, they can see the picture.
I would think that it's a solid piece.
Yeah, solid piece.
Instead of pieces welded together.
Yeah.
The way they do.
Because as far as we know, we don't know anything about welding. They may have been able to do it, but we aren't told anything about it. So be of one piece with it. Verse 32, there were to be 6 branches going out of the sides of the candlestick, 3 branches on one side, 3 branches on the other side. Are the number of branches important? Does it matter how many branches you got on one side or the other? Isn't one branch as good as another? That's almost a little trick question. As long as there are 6 of them, and you have 3 on one side and 3 on the other, one's as good as another. But you can't add one more, can't subtract, one more, one less. Specificity, specify. Verse 33, in each of the 6 branches there were to be 3 cups made like almond blossoms. There was also to be a knot and a flower. So you have a cup made like an almond blossom. Did they know what an almond blossom looked like? Yeah, or they wouldn't know how to make a cup. So they knew exactly what all was involved in this. 4 cups, verse 34, were to be made like almond blossoms, the knots and the flowers thereof. Verse 35, a knot was to be made under 2 branches of one piece with it. For the 6 branches, that should be the there, for the 6 branches going out of the candlestick. Verse 36, the knots and the branches are to be of one piece with it. The whole of it, one beaten work of pure gold. So you see the talents of these people who were the workmen. You had skilled people doing this. This wasn't just get a whole bunch of boys out of the mountains and throw something together.
Would this be after a pattern like everything?
Yeah.
I mean, they had a pattern.
Had a pattern. Here's how you make it. The problem with that is you could give me a pattern and it wouldn't turn out like he said it might.
You're not inspired by
Huh?
that. You're not inspired.
No. No, not when it comes to that. No. I was to make a gun rack in shop. And the sound of the saw unnerved me. And when I got through, you could hang a gun on it. But it wasn't according to the pattern. I could speak. That's about as far as I could go. So I'm preaching and not making woodwork to things. You have to learn your limitations. All right, 7 lamps were to be made. Verse 37, these lamps were to be lit to give light over against or in front of it. And this provided AWL, the light for the tabernacle. Arrange its lamps so they give light in front of it. Now when the priest went into the holy place to offer, and I left off altar's incense, they went in to offer their incense or to trim the lamps or to change the bread. They had to be received. And the lamp stand provided light. In Exodus 27, excuse me, and verse 20, You shall command the children of Israel that they bring you pure oil of pressed olives for the light, to cause the lamp to burn continually. In the tabernacle of meeting, outside the veil, which is before the testimony. What's the testimony? Ark of the Covenant. Aaron and his sons shall tend it from evening until morning before Jehovah. It shall be a statute forever to their generations on behalf of the children of Israel. So, pure olive oil of pressed olives. Chapter 35, verse 8. Offering is to be made to buy or to obtain oil for the light. Verse 8. Then drop down to verse 28. Spices and oil for the light, for the anointing oil and for the sweet incense. So oil is to be pure olive oil of pressed olives. So they had olive presses. They would get that oil. Right, in verses 20 and 21 of Exodus 27, these lamps are to be trimmed and lighted daily by Aaron and his sons. Daily. And were to burn continually. Go to Exodus 30, verses 7 and 8. It talks here about the altar of incense. Verse 7, Aaron shall burn on it the altar of incense, sweet incense every morning when he tends the lamps. He shall burn incense on it. And when Aaron lights the lamps at twilight, literally between the two evenings, he shall burn incense on it. So, you have a time to burn incense, and you're changing the light. You're trimming the lights when you do that. Chapter 30, again, verses 7 and 8. Verse 8, when Aaron lights the lamps between the two evenings at twilight, then he's to burn the incense. Chapter 40, you see in chapter 40 they set up the tabernacle. Chapter 40, verse 4, you shall bring in the table and arrange the things that are to be set in order on it, and you shall bring in the lampstand and light its lamps. Set up the lamps. This is setting it up. Drop down to verse 25. And he lit the lamps before Jehovah, notice it, as Jehovah had commanded Moses. Here again you see the repetition of this authority that is being done. Go to Leviticus 24. Verses 2 to 4. Command the children of Israel that they bring to you pure oil of pressed olives for the light, to make the lamps burn continually, outside the veil of the testimony, in the tabernacle of meeting. Aaron shall be in charge of it from evening until morning before Jehovah continually. It shall be a statute forever in your generations. He shall be in charge of the lamps on the pure gold lampstand before Jehovah continually. All right, look at 1 Samuel chapter 3. We'll begin reading verse 2. It came to pass at that time, while Eli was lying down in his place, And when his eyes had begun to grow so dim that he could not see, now notice this, and before the lamp of God went out in the tabernacle of Jehovah where the ark of God was. And while Samuel was lying down, before the lamp was trimmed, this was taking place. 2 Chronicles chapter 13. Verse 10, as for me, Jehovah is our God, and we have not forsaken him. And the priests who minister to Jehovah are the sons of Aaron, and the Levites attend to their duties, and they burn to Jehovah every morning and every evening burnt sacrifices and sweet incense. They also set the showbread in order on the pure gold table, and the lamps, or the lampstand of gold with its lamps, to burn every evening. For we keep the command of Jehovah our God, but you have forsaken him. Notice all the way down to the time of Abijah, faithful Israelites, the remnant, still worshiping according to the pattern. Now we saw in Leviticus 24:3, the lampstand was to be outside the veil in the tabernacle. So outside the veil in the tabernacle means it's before Jehovah. All right, chapter 25, verse 38. What the American Standard calls snuffers, the New King James wick trimmers, tweezers to trim the wicks, and snuff dishes, a pan for live coals, were to be made of pure gold. Verse 39, it shall be made of a talent of pure gold with all these utensils. One writer said a talent of gold weighed about 108 pounds. Another writer said God obviously wanted the place where he met with Israel to be aesthetically pleasing. Now that's just big terminology for he wanted it to look good. So God does pay attention to detail. Pays attention to aesthetics. Now, in chapter 37, in verses 17 through 24, again in verse 17, he also made the lampstand. And then you go all the way down and you see the detail. But what God said do is what Bezalel did in building the tabernacle. Now, you may or may not have heard of the Arch of Titus. It was built in 81 AD by Domitian. He was the Roman emperor, to commemorate Titus's triumph over the Jews in 70 AD. That's when Jerusalem was destroyed. That's what Jesus predicted in Matthew 24 and Luke 21. And this arch was built. Domitian built it to commemorate that victory. The south inner panel depicts the spoils taken from the temple in Jerusalem. Remember, they burned the temple, tore it down, tore the city apart. The golden candelabrum, or menorah, you've heard the Jews today refer to it as the menorah, is the main focus and is carved in deep relief. Other sacred objects being carried in the triumphal procession. See, they would take these objects and proceed through the city streets to say, we've conquered that God. We've conquered that nation, or whatever is involved in it. Are the gold trumpets, the fire pans for removing the ashes from the altar, and the table of showbread. These foils were likely originally colored gold with the background in blue, that is on the arch. And there you can see the candelabrum stands out. If you get in really close, you can see some of these other things that they're carrying, but the golden candlestick is what's under consideration for us tonight. So you have this being made. And you have questions or comments on the golden candlestick?
Well, it makes me think of what all we've been going over here tonight, how somebody cannot understand baptism is important.
Or anything else God said.
or anything else.
And you make a good point, because when you're studying with people like that, go back to these things and say, look at the detail. Now, why would God be different in the New Testament? See, they don't have anything here to try to answer, or try to back up. They don't have any prejudice here. And so you can illustrate the principle in a way they can make application. That's one of the reasons knowing your Old Testament is so helpful in studying. You have so many ways to illustrate New Testament truths. And people can see that. Oh yeah, I can see that. All right, let's come to the New Testament. Why would God be less interested in doing it the way He said do it when we're talking about the church of His Son? We're talking about the church His Son died for. Or how to be saved by the blood of His Son. Why would it be any less interested in detail? And here's how He said do it. Now look how important it was back here to do what He said do. That makes sense? That's just good use of your Old Testament. All right, verse 40. Again, our key emphasis. See to it that you make according to the pattern which was shown you on the mountain. That's just repeated over and over. According to the pattern shown you on the mountain. According to the pattern. Make it according to the pattern. He says that to drive that point home. So when I say things to you more than one time, it's not because I think you're ignorant, it's because I know if we repeat it, you drive it home better. And that's a good thing to remember in teaching boys and girls. They don't get it the first time around. And mamas and daddies don't always get it the first time around. Doesn't matter how intelligent we are. So the more you can repeat, the more you can go over, the more you can teach the same thing, the easier it is for people to finally make the connection. And I have been preaching or teaching class when I've seen it in people's eyes and in their mind. It finally turned over the cog. And their mind said, oh, that's what that is. I got it. And it may take longer for me than you, or you than me on some things. So don't be afraid, teachers, to go back over it. Ask questions. The Socratic method of teaching is a method of asking questions. And the students teach themselves basically by the answering of questions on whatever the subject is. So I do have some goal in my madness, going over and asking all those questions. Notice A, one writer said, nothing was left to their own invention, or the fancy of the workman, or the people's humor, certainly, but the will of God must be religiously observed in every particular. So in chapter 25 and verse 40, and also at verse 9, it's stressed. Go to Acts 7 and let's see what Stephen told them. I should have asked, Acts 7 is about what? Yes. Acts 7 is a great summary of this part of the Old Testament. Verse 44, Stephen said, our fathers had the tabernacle of witness. So you have the witness there in the wilderness, as he appointed. Look at that, as he appointed. Instructing Moses to make it according to the pattern, now notice this, that he had seen. So God showed Moses how he wanted this ark to be. He didn't just tell him. He showed him. And I'm told by people who can make things that it helps to have a diagram. It helps to have a picture. It helps to have a pattern of where things go and how they go. I know I am so technologically challenged. That's a highfalutin way to say ignorant. Internet stuff and printers and all this. If I ever unhook anything, I write down exactly where it went in minute detail for me, or I will hook it up wrong when I put it back together. There's a pattern as to how that stuff has to go. You have to plug it in the right hole in order for it to work. And when Danny Davis worked on my computer, I said to him over more than one time, I ought to charge you because you are learning so much on correcting the messes that I make. And I was not exaggerating. I can make some doozies if I don't pay attention. So make it according to the pattern. B, notice the emphasis on the pattern all the way through. The emphasis on the pattern all the way through. Now, if I can get some of you men to hand out these, this is our next handout. All right, let's look at then the tabernacle itself in chapter 26 and in chapter 36, 8 to 38. Now, in your introduction, I reiterate some things that I've said previously. Chapters 25 to 31 contain the instructions given to Moses by Jehovah concerning the construction of the tabernacle and everything that pertained to it. And I think now we've done this enough that you have seen everything that pertained to it. Nothing was just thrown out there. And chapters 24 to 31 were given while Moses was in the mountain. Chapters 35 to 39 contain the account of the actual fulfillment of the instructions when Moses came down from the mount the second time. And they repeat, for the most part, the information given in chapters 25 to 31. Much of the repetition is verbatim, and we learned that means
Exactly.
exactly. Then the forms of the verbs are changed from imperative, you shall make, to indicative, he made. Number 2, the repetition of the exact phraseology of the instructions given to Moses in chapters 25 to 31 serves to impress upon the mind of the reader the fact that these instructions were obeyed, and I didn't misspell that, the quote misspelled it. I know better, you know that why. That's 6, that's beside it. It says, this is verbatim, but I know it's incorrect. They were to be obeyed in detail. See, I'm telling you these things because some of you may go to college one day and have to write a term paper or you quote somebody. Number 3, the exact or repetition of the exact instructions for building the tabernacle and its furniture would accomplish several things. I've I've given you three. Number one, Moses wrote primarily for the people of Israel, whom it would be of great use to read, now look at this, to read and hear often of these divine and sacred treasures with which they were entrusted. Keep on hearing about it. Look how blessed you folks are. Look what God has given to you. And repetitious sermons sometimes serve to remind us of things we already know, but of how precious they are. We can let the glimmer rub off if we're not careful. And we don't keep before us the preciousness of it, and we start taking it for granted. It becomes just hold on. And it should never be that way. I knew of an eldership which was basically consisted of one elder. We had other men, but he was the elder. He ran the show. And when they would hire a preacher, the first demand that he would make of the preacher was, you cannot ever repeat a sermon. They make words for that. But what that did was rob the people of a tremendous way of learning. And that's repetition. You hear it over and over again. You know, I fussed about this enough that I think I've pretty well gotten it over to everybody here. You know, after a while it sinks in and people just humor you. But every time we give the plan of salvation, that ought not be ho-hum. That ought not be, okay, let's get our coats together, put our stuff together, and get ready to go. It shouldn't be a signal, oh boy, this thing's about over. It should be a reminder of, look what God did to save my soul. Oh, how blessed I am. Moses, one writer said, would thus show the great care with which he and his workmen took to make everything exactly according to the pattern shown him in the mount. And thus he teaches us to have respect to A-L-L, all God's commandments, even to every iota and tittle of them. Remember, Jesus said every yod or jot and tittle of the law would be fulfilled. Now, in South, I guess in English, we mispronounce that Greek term and we call it every iota. It's literally iota. And then third, one writer said, it is intimated hereby that God takes delight, notice this, in the sincere obedience of his people, and keeps an exact account of it, which shall be produced to their honor in the resurrection of the just. None can be so punctual in their duty, but God will be as punctual in his notices of it. Now what that says is it really does matter how we do things. It really does matter to God whether or not we do what he said do. And you have John 5:28 and 29, the resurrection of the just and the unjust. Well, what determines whether one's just or unjust? It's obedience. The just have been obedient. The unjust have been disobedient. Notice C. One writer said, far from being a wearisome set of petty rubrics drawn up by some liturgists, these chapters in Exodus present the score of a glorious symphony of sacrifice offered to the mighty God. Now, a glorious symphony means everything's in harmony. You don't have anyone off note, off key. D, the writer of the Annual Lesson Commentary, 1945, observed the following concerning the tabernacle. Quote, the tabernacle is God's dwelling place with the nation. It prefigured the more permanent place, the temple, and finally, the spiritual institution, the church. An understanding of the tabernacle and its worship is essential to understanding much of the New Testament. And this becomes your illustration in the book of Hebrews. Tabernacle. So, to quote Professor W.G. Moorhead, the tabernacle was a divine object lesson, an embodied prophecy of good things to come, a witness to the grace and saving power of God. It taught salvation through propitiation, forgiveness, and bloodshed, access to God and worship. It disclosed the holiness of God. All these things were brought out. The sinfulness of man, the reconciliation which in due time should be effected, are all clearly set forth by the tabernacle and its rites. So it's an object lesson of what we have on the New Testament. F, when one considers the instructions and the fulfillment together, he sees the pattern principle of obedience. Exodus 35:1, these are the words which Jehovah hath commanded, would be an appropriate summary for Exodus 35 to 40. Number 2, the attention to pattern is seen in the words and works of Moses as he led the people to do, marking exactly what Jehovah said regarding the tabernacle. Number 3, nothing could be more clear than the importance of following the pattern given by Jehovah in this matter. Most of us probably, well, I don't know what they do today. Most of us learned how to write our letters by following the pattern. And if we didn't follow it exactly, we didn't make the letter correct. And that's what you see here. Number 4, men today must learn that God has always had a pattern and that He expects all accountable beings to obey that pattern. That's true for us, particularly. Now, when it comes to the tabernacle, Exodus has 13 chapters devoted to it. Leviticus has 18 chapters devoted to it. Numbers has 13 chapters devoted to it. Deuteronomy has 2 chapters devoted to it. Hebrews has 4 chapters devoted to it. And this writer said that's a great deal of inspired material. God must have considered it of great importance. And I've said over and over how much in Hebrews cannot be properly understood without first understanding the construction of the tabernacle and the system of worship. You have 3 main parts. The tabernacle, that's the tent and its covering. These parts are very clearly distinguished in the Hebrew, but they're confounded in many places of the English version. So you have the tabernacle, you have its tent, you have its covering. Now, as we move to chapter 26, this chapter concerns itself with the tabernacle itself, the tent, and the veils. Nothing is said about the floor of the tabernacle. If you turn to Numbers chapter 5, and verse 17, the priest shall take holy water in an earthen vessel and take some of the dust that's on the floor of the tabernacle and put it into the water. It seems to indicate that it did not have a built floor, that it was dust. Now that will serve to introduce chapter 26, and Lord willing, next time we will look at beginning the curtains for the tabernacle. Do you have questions or comments on what we've done tonight?